Hello guys, welcome to Relax School. My name is Jyoti and I am a CMA finalist. In this video, we are going to discuss about transportation. This is our second video on transportation, and in this video, we are going to discuss about northwest corner method. Right, in the previous videos, we talked about the basics of transportation. We talked about what is a balanced and unbalanced transportation problem. Next, we talked about the procedure to solve the transportation problem. In that, the first step is to find the basic feasible solution. And how do we find a basic feasible solution? We have three methods for that. And the first method is northwest corner method, which we are going to discuss right now. So this is our concept for northwest corner method. So what happens in the northwest corner method? I don't want to try and talk too much about it because when we solve the problem, everything will become clear. So firstly, we will always start with the top left corner and we will make allocation there right away. Right. Why top left corner? See, in directions, this is north, this is south, this is east and this is west. So this top left quadrant, this is basically top left corner. So even when we are solving using northwest corner method, we will always start with the top left corner. Right. Next we will make allocation right there, and while making allocation, we will choose the minimum of supply and demand. Right. And after we made the allocation, we will either move to the right or we either move to the down, depending on if the supply is more or demand is more. So we will understand all of these steps while solving the solution directly. Let's see, this is our illustration number 1 from CMA Final study material. And in this question, we have three sources P1, P2 and P3. And we have four destinations R1, R2, R3 and R4. Right. From sources, of course, we have supply. So from P1, we have a supply of 50 units. From P2, we have a supply of 75 units. From P3, we have a supply of 25 units. Right, in the same way, we have demand from the retail shops. So let's see. From R1, we have a demand of 20 units. From R2, we have a demand of 20 units. R3, we have a demand of 50. R4, we have a demand of 60. So these many units these people need, and these sources are capable of supplying this much. So let's see, every time before we solve a transportation problem, we need to see if the total demand is equal to total supply or not. So that is what we will see. Now if you look at the supply, it is 50 plus 75 plus 25. So this is 150, 150. The total supply is. So now when it comes to demand, it is 20 plus 20 plus 50 plus 60. So 60 plus 40, 100, 150. So the total demand is also 150. Now here the total supply is equal to total demand. Now this is a balanced problem. So now we can solve this using any of the methods, right? Now as we discussed in the northwest corner method, we always start with the top left corner. See, this is the whole matrix. And in this whole matrix, this is the top left corner. So we will choose this cell. And here, we will start our allocation right away. Right. How many units are we going to send from P1 to R1? This is basically our job because we chose this cell. So we will see the corresponding demand and supply for that. Now if you see, the corresponding demand is 20 units from R1. So R1 needs 20 units. From P1, we have a corresponding supply of 50 units. Right. So what is the maximum that we can allocate here? See, the demand is 20 units, the supply is 50 units. So if P1 said, I have 50 units, I will supply you 50 units. R1 would be like, man, I only need 20 units. What would I do with other 30 units? So the maximum possible allocation is only 20 units. Before, if you remember, so before when we talked about allocation, we said we always choose the minimum of supply and demand. This is what I meant when I said that. Here, if you observe, the demand is 20 units, the supply is 50 units, and we chose the minimum of supply and demand, which is 20 units, and we made allocation here. Right. So with this allocation, what happened? From P1 to R1, we are sending 20 units. Because of this allocation, the demand of R1 is satisfied, and from P1, see, P1 supplied 20 units, he has 50, so 50 minus 20, now he's still left with 30 units only. Now let's see. Before I said, depending on if the supply is more or demand is more, we are either going to move to the right or in the downward direction. So let's see. If I move in the downward direction, understand that R1's demand is satisfied. Even if I chose this cell and I tried to allocate something, let's just say I allocated 1 unit, the total is 20 plus 1. Right? R1 gets 21 units in total. How many units does R1 need? Only 20 units. So what is the point of me moving downward, selecting this cell and making some allocation? Right? So R1 doesn't need anything anymore. So I'm not moving downward, I'm moving right side. So basically when supply is more, right, here supply is more, demand is exhausted, there is still supply of 30 units. So when supply is more, we are going to move right side. That is what I said before. We will move right if the supply is more. So now I will select this cell. I will move to the right and I am selecting this cell. Now I will start allocation here right away. Now let's see, the corresponding demand for R2 is 20 units and the corresponding supply of P1 is 30 units. See, I selected this cell. So P1 and R2. I hope you are getting my point. So I am selecting the corresponding demand of R2 and I am selecting the corresponding supply of P1. Now what is the maximum allocation possible in this cell? See, the demand is 20, the supply is 30. Even though P1 is capable of sending 30 units, R2 only needs 20 units. So R2 will be like, man, send me my 20 units. I don't care if you have 30 units or not. Right. So the maximum possible allocation is 20 units. This 20 units is also the minimum of supply and demand. Right. Moving forward, I am going to choose the minimum of supply and demand. I am not going to say the whole story. So because of this allocation from P1 to R2, which is 20 units, I have exhausted the demand of R2 and P1's supply is reduced by 20 units because he sent 20 units, 30 minus 20 is going to be 10. Right. Just like what happened before, I'm either going to move to the right or in the downward direction depending on if the supply is more or demand is more. Here R2 doesn't need anything anymore. See, R2's demand is exhausted. He doesn't need anything. So now what we will do? Because the supply is more, I'm going to move in the right side direction. Now I am choosing this cell, P1 to R3. Just like what I have done before, I'll see the corresponding demand. R3 needs 50 units. I'll see the corresponding supply. P1 can supply 10 units. Right, what is the minimum of supply and demand? The minimum of supply and demand is 10 units. Why? Because even though R3 needs 50 units, P1 can only give 10 units. Right, so because of this allocation from P1 to R3, because we allocated 10 units, the corresponding supply is exhausted and R3 demand is reduced by 10. So 50 minus 10 is going to be 40 units. See, now if you observe, P1 supply is completely over. Like P1 is not capable of supplying anything anymore. So what is the point of me moving to the right? Right? P1 can't supply anything. So now I want to move downwards. So I'll select this cell. As I said, when demand is more, we are going to move downward. So we will move down if the demand is more. So here supply is completely exhausted for P1. So we are moving in the downward direction. Now I'm selecting this cell. Now the same old story, I'm going to see the corresponding demand of the selected cell. I'm going to see the corresponding supply of the selected cell. What is the maximum possible allocation here? See, the demand is 40 units, the supply is 75 units. What is the minimum of supply and demand? 40 units. Because of this allocation, what happened? R3's demand is completely exhausted and the supply of P2 is reduced by 40 units. So 75 minus 40, that is going to be 35, right? Now, we made another allocation. Now what we will do, same old story. We are either going to move to the right or down depending on if supply is more or demand is more. So if the supply is more, demand is over. Now I'm going to move towards right. Now I will select this cell. Now I have selected the cell. What I will do, I will allocate as much as possible there. For this, I'll see the corresponding demand. I'll see the corresponding supply. What is the corresponding demand? It is 60. The corresponding supply is 35. What is the minimum of both of them? 35, of course. So I'll allocate 35 units. Because of this allocation from P2 to R4, this 35 units is exhausted and the corresponding R4's demand is reduced by 35. So 60 minus 35, which is going to be 25, right? Now let's see, we only have one direction to move towards, which is downward. And now when I select this cell, if your problem has balanced, right, if the total demand is equal to total supply, what happens is, if you look at the corresponding demand and supply, you always have the same amount. So now I will allocate 25 because the demand is 25, the supply is also 25. I made an allocation of 25. This demand is satisfied, this supply is also satisfied. See, so what happened in the northwest corner method? We started with the top left corner and we allocated as much as possible. What is as much as possible? The minimum of corresponding supply and demand. Right. We allocated that and we reduced the supply and demand accordingly. Later we either move to the right or in the downward depending on if the supply is more or demand is more. If the supply is more, we will move right side. If the demand is more, we will move downward. Now we will repeat the same old process again and again. See, I moved right because the supply is more. I selected this cell. I will allocate here. Later I'll again check if I should move right or down. Right, the same old process I'll repeat until I reach the last cell and I completely exhaust all my supply and demand constraints. If you see, all our supply is satisfied and all our demand is satisfied. Now, we will talk about basic feasible solution. See, we know what is a basic feasible solution is. A basic feasible solution should have m plus n minus 1 number of allocations. Right, here we see we have 3 rows 1, 2, 3 and 4 columns 1, 2, 3 and 4. So m is number of rows, so 3, n is number of columns, so 4 minus 1, which is going to give me 7 minus 1, 6 allocations. So to call this a basic feasible solution, I need to have 6 allocations in total. So let's see how many allocations did I make. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So yes, this is a basic feasible solution. Now let's see what is the transportation cost that we incurred also. Right. Let me just write how many allocations did I make from P1 to R1. 20. So I'll write P1 to R1. I made 20 units of allocation and it cost me 3 rupees each. So 20 into 3, this basically means 60 rupees. So the next allocation is from P1 to R2. So from P1 to R2, I made an allocation of 20 units with 5 rupees. So 20 units each cost me 5 rupees. 5 to 10. So 100. So next allocation is from P1 to R3. So I'll write P1 to R3. And how many allocations did I make? 10 units with 7 rupees each. 10 units with 7 rupees each. 70 rupees. Next from P1 to R3. P2 to R3, right? Now I made 40 units with 8 rupees. So 40 units with 8 rupees. So 8 4s 32, 320. Next, from P2 to R4, I made an allocation of 35 units. P2 to R4, I made an allocation of 30 units. The cost is 2 rupees. 35 units, the cost is 2 rupees, so 70. Next, from P3 to R4, I made an allocation of 25 into 2 rupees. So P3 to R4, 25 into 2. This basically means 50 units. Now let's see what is the total transportation cost. Let me just use the calculator. So we have 60 plus 100 plus 70 plus 320 plus 70 plus 50. Right. The total transportation cost is 670 rupees. Right. So this is basically northwest corner method. In the next video, we'll discuss about the other methods. For more such content, like, share and subscribe. And don't forget to comment your thoughts below.